ready to sink your teeth into scripture and get a bulldog grip on its truth? Let's gnaw on some doctrine and get bulldogmatic. Here is your host.
Hi, my name is Scott. Welcome to Bibles, Bulldogs, and Beards. I'm here with Pastor William Shifflett, who is pastor at Reasoning Tree Church in Edinburgh, Virginia, and it's great to be here with you today, Pastor.
Good to be here with you.
Well, today we're going to do something just a little bit different. I thought that we would take a look at some of the current news that's going on, and we haven't done that yet, so it'll be interesting to see how this turns out, but we're going to take some of these stories and chew on them like a bulldog would, get a good grip on them, bulldog grip. Take a little bit of a turn. I want to talk about Fox News. Fox News announced, and this is along the same lines, that Bruce Jenner is now going to be on as I don't think a host, but as a contributor on Fox News. Now, it's interesting to see the reaction on social media. There's some people that, I saw some posts that said, that's it, I'm done with Fox News now. And you see things like that. But I wanted to ask you that it's just, do you think that's just the direction that we're heading in? I mean, we used to look, I guess, as Fox News is probably associated with the Republican Party by most people, and the other cable news are probably associated with the other political party. I don't want to get too political,
sure,
but I'm going to have to talk about the Republican Party because I associated myself with the Republican Party for many years, but I see this drift in the Republican Party, and I see this drift in Fox News as well, to where they're more and more, they're moving away. Back when I was younger in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s, the Republican Party stood for biblical, how do I put it? They took the biblical stance on most issues. Now I see that kind of going away. Do you see that same thing? Do you think I'm correct, or am I just too old?
Okay, so we'll go back to our phrase earlier, imprecise, okay?
Right. And I apologize for taking forever to ask a
that's a very good question. The problem is that, yes, they were big on, they talked big, but they never followed through. Right. Which means if you really look at the history, they made all these promises to the Christian community and very seldom kept any of those promises. Right. George W. Bush, as an example, was heralded as a great Christian man, and he was going to help us. And after 9/11, he went into the National Cathedral and said that if you pray to Muhammad, you're praying to the same God. We're all serving the same God, which is theologically nonsense. So you have that kind of stuff. Trump was heralded by many people on the right as the Christian support, and before he was even elected, Trump said that transgender people should use whatever bathroom they want. Mm-hmm. So I think if we look only at the scriptural aspects of the language they use, and I think both sides do it. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden doing it as well.
Right.
So we have to look at the way they talk and recognize that, unfortunately, it is a part of politics in general that you have to say things you don't mean because you've got to have people's votes to get elected. It's not as simple as it was. When you have 330 million people in the country, granted only 200 million vote, that's still a lot of diversity that you have to consider. I do think there are political realities about that you have to deal with. again, in some respects to the country on the changes. Now, let me flip to the other side of the issue and try to paint the hopefulness if I could. First, a Fox News contributor may be somebody they call on once a blue moon. Mm-hmm. The gender person that they have hired as a contributor was very outspoken about the Leah Thomas thing, saying that he was a cheater because he's a man. He's not a woman, he's a man. He still has his male genitals, he still has his penis. If I'm not being too direct for people watching, he is a man claiming to be a woman, and she was, and Bruce / Caitlin was very forceful about that in saying this is part of the woke nonsense that's going on. Okay?
Well, let me stop you right there. And we have a party, a political party that celebrates this. And yet they say they're for women's rights. Now, isn't that, I mean, I can't figure that out. Right. How can you be for women's rights when you allow a man to compete against women only, right, and he's winning? How can you? I mean, you can't be for one, for right, both. I mean,
well, this is and when you say political party at this point, you're talking about the Democrats.
The Democrats, right. Yeah.
Okay, so that's an excellent point, and that's where the breakdown again, as I go back to earlier, comes in, where most people know this nonsense. You cannot say you're for women and then support a man swimming in women's sports. The guy's a foot and a half taller than any of the other women. So that's the contradiction that the culture is picking up on. And I say that. Somebody asked me the other week about where are the feminists? Because when Donald Trump was elected, they all went out in D.C. and put on their hats, their little pink hats, and they were talking about what a great thing it is to be a woman and how Donald Trump was a monster when it came to women, and you haven't heard a peep out of them throughout this. You have not heard a peep.
They've disappeared.
Yeah, because their positions are so incoherent. Mm-hmm. They cannot consistently hold to this, and so they just shut their mouth and they hope it goes away. But that's where you have, this is the benefit, quote unquote, of someone like Bruce / Caitlyn Jenner to speak, because they are going to say, this is crazy. And they are saying that. And when they are asked to make a contribution, it will be along those lines of men and women's sports or on the transgender stuff, because of that, the quote unquote, the most famous transgender person in the world is Caitlyn Jenner. Mm-hmm. But Caitlyn Jenner will call out the hypocrisy of this woke environment, and no other news organization is going to do that, because they are not willing to admit that men are men and women are women, and that's where it stops. And by the way, in the interest of fairness, Caitlyn Jenner has gone through the transitional surgery. Okay?
Oh, yeah. I wasn't aware of that.
So that's a little bit of difference between some other transgenders, which just say, okay, today I'm a man. Next week I might be a woman again. Then I'll come back to be a man, or then I'll be non-binary. And this kind of total craziness that each day the person can claim to be something else. Mm-hmm. Little bit of difference there, even with Will / Leah Thomas, who has not gone through anything other than the hormone therapy to suppress his testosterone levels.
Hmm. Well, I think I referred to him as Bruce Jenner.
Yeah.
And I guess it's probably, I remember him on the Wheaties box, in the Olympics and things like that. And I don't pay that much attention to things like this.
No, but
it's good to discuss them.
If the media was not constantly pounding on that subject, most people in America would never think twice about the whole trend. It's being pushed by the media and political elites, But the majority of people are sitting back saying, you're a bunch of idiots. Even for President Biden, they're looking at him and saying, you must be, among all your other problems, you're a complete idiot. You cannot say that there's no difference between men and women and then say, I'm going to appoint a woman to the Supreme Court. Why? If there's no difference, how can her, quote unquote, insights be more valuable than his, quote unquote, insights?
And if you want to get even more ridiculous, she's the first black woman. How does she define black or blackness?
Yeah. And that's
how much, what is it, melanin do you need to be qualified to be a black person? I mean, and discussions like that are absolutely.
Yeah, but it just shows
silliness.
It shows how far our culture has fallen with respect that we can't have a serious conversation on stuff. Well, you're going to be shot down if you say, well, now, it's like the guy that responded to my piece in the paper and saying, well, gender is nuanced. That's nonsense. Mm-hmm. There are male and female. Everybody knows it. Everybody in the world knows it. You mentioned the TSA saying you could put an X on your passport because you're non-gender or whatever.
Yeah.
But, well, that's okay. Knock yourself out. That's going to affect, maybe 1 in 100 million people are going to have an X on their passport because it's just so bizarre. Mm-hmm. And that's why I don't think, and I'll say this, again, making reference to that illustration I've used about the turning of the aircraft carrier. Right now, it's a big deal. Everybody's talking about it, but that rage can only go so far. Mm-hmm. You can only be angry so long, and you'll have to find something else to be angry about. And the wheel will turn, and then you're going to have the victims of this stuff because they... And again, so when we talk about there's so much information, you cannot access it all. As someone, because the news, so the news is biased in the first place, and the news typically only deals with a subject for 3.5 minutes. Mm-hmm. They bring somebody on to talk about a massive issue, and they give them 3 minutes to talk about it. This is the value of podcasts. Right. Because in a podcast like this, you're able to talk about a subject for a half an hour. Mm-hmm. And there are numerous very good podcasts out there today who are making these same kind of arguments, both in America and in Europe, where people are paying attention to them, and they're agreeing this is total crazy nonsense. And we're not going to support that. And that, I think, is where this whole idea of transgenderism eventually collapses in on itself.
Well, I'm a big advocate of equal time, and you talked about George Bush, and you talked about Donald Trump. Let's talk about President Biden.
Okay.
Now, President Biden says, I have a hard time saying that. Biden says that he's a Christian. And I have to take the man at his word. I can't see his heart. Only God can see his heart. So when he was inaugurated, like all the other presidents, he placed his hand upon the Bible, God's word, and said the oath to become president. He said, so help me God. So the man supposedly, our president supposedly has faith in God. And yet, some of the things, like you mentioned the TSA. Now, this has to be coming from higher up, I think, than just the TSA, because it's all happening at around the same time. They now adopt new general neutral policy. So when you go through the TSA and I guess on your passport now, you don't have to say you're a man or a woman. You can decide, I don't know how often you can change it, but when you get up to, I guess, the TSA agent, You can tell them whatever you decide you are that particular day. I don't mean to be. Yeah, I do. No, I shouldn't be trite about it because I guess some people take this seriously. I can't really take it seriously because
No.
But this has to be coming from him, and he also didn't he issue that it's just the other day that some transgender day or something like that.
Transvisibility Day, yeah. He declared someday Transvisibility Day. I don't know if it's going to be a yearly thing or whether it's just something he did. If he did it, it will go by the way, just like a lot of other stuff. You know, it's like Homosexual Pride Month.
Yeah.
That is getting lost in. There's so many other. For example, April is Child Prevention Month, and April is Parkinson's Awareness Month, and April is so it comes down to where the month is only valuable to the person who identifies,
Right.
and that's the way it is with the homosexual thing. I do think that's so. I think the transgender thing, but when he first came into office, he changed something that said they weren't going to refer to. They're going to be gender neutral. So he came into the very thing. Let's go back to a moment about his Christian confession. What we must always remember is that Jesus, the same Jesus who says, "Do not judge," says, "Out of the abundance of your heart, your mouth speaks." And Jesus said, "It's not what you eat that defiles you; it's what comes out that defiles you, because that is the true representation of who is inside, of who you really are." So for the president to claim to be a Christian and then everything he does contradicts his Christianity makes it fully acceptable to say, I do not believe he's a Christian. What kind of Christian supports the murder of babies?
Right.
What kind of Christian supports the violation of the law? And he is violating federal law with the immigration policies. The federal government, he's not doing a thing about that. What kind of Christian doesn't have any regard for the law? I understand all of us, it's like speed limits or this or that. We might bend the rules a little bit, but there's a difference between that and out law breaking, and that's what he's doing. So when do you do that? How can you claim to be representing God and what you're doing violates even the Catholic faith? The problem is the Catholics don't have any guts anymore to stand up for anything. They keep changing policies that Pope Francis making it more inclusive or whatever. In one breath he says you can't be a homosexual, and in the next breath they have some woman who works with homosexuals in the Vatican. I mean, now if you're talking about homosexuals who are struggling with the homosexuality, that's different. If you're talking about validating it. So I don't think it is wrong to say, I don't believe he's a Christian because there's no fruit in his life. Religious fruit, I see nothing that is distinctly Christian in his life, okay? We go back to what we said earlier about social goodness, or I should say in a previous podcast, social goodness versus moral goodness, and I just don't think you can consciously affirm, and I say the same thing for Clinton, I say the same thing for Obama. They all made the claim that they were Christians, and yet they all followed policies that were clearly not Christian.
Not Christian. Well, I guess it just shows us the futility in putting our faith in men, because all men are fallen. I mean, if, God forbid, I ever became president, you could point to numerous areas where I fall short.
Right.
So, we're not really, I guess we are judging in one sense, but I mean, we're not pointing the fingers at them. Well, we're pointing the fingers at everyone because, I mean, it's one thing to fall short. It's another thing to blatantly disobey.
Sure.
And we see that, I mean, the scripture is being blatantly disobeyed in our government.
Well, and I also think we have to again put the concept of judging. People say we shouldn't judge. Well, Joe Biden is showing signs, and everybody agrees with it. Something like 60% of the people in America do not think he's competent.
Right.
And that's rising from the impression that he's struggling with dementia and senility.
Mm-hmm.
Now, am I judging unfairly when I say I think he's showing signs of dementia? Some people would say, well, you shouldn't judge. There is a point where I have to say the man's behavior and conduct is questionable.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we've never had
we tend to protect presidents from what would be considered disability. Roosevelt was in a wheelchair. And, of course, that was during wartime, mostly. So they, you know, a lot of people had no idea that he was confined to a wheelchair.
Right.
So we see Biden, unfortunately, I think he's propped up, you know, and you can see how feeble the man is, and I pray for Joe Biden. I do. I think he's in a very difficult situation because you can see he is failing.
Well, and
that happens. And
that's where I judge the people around him with the same severity because they know it and they're tolerating it instead of saying, okay, the president has some challenges that we're going to have to deal with, which most Americans would understand.
Mm-hmm.
They pretend like it's not happening, which most Americans don't understand. And so, yes, I agree. And I've always said that. His wife knew he had these problems when she allowed him to run for president. And she bears responsibility as much as he does.
Yeah.
And she's a doctor, by the way, or supposed to be. So there's no way she misses this stuff in the day-to-day. But let us separate physical disabilities from moral transgression. And some of what he does in his political office is morally transgressing the laws of God.
Mm-hmm.
And we can never excuse that as Christians.
Exactly.
Bibles, Bulldogs, and Beards was brought to you by BibleBulldog.com. Purveyors of antiquarian Bibles, theology books, and other Christian items. Also enjoy hundreds of podcasts and sermons while you visit BibleBulldog.com. Visit BibleBulldog.com today.